Great. As Diane mentioned, my name is Emiel. I'm a conservation social scientist, and I did my PhD at the University of Edinburgh. I'm speaking to you today from Cambodia, where I'm working with a conservation enterprise called Ibis Rice and an NGO called Sansom Maluk Pre. And I'm going to speak to you today about the Conservation Social Science Partnership, or ConSoSci, and some of the work that this partnership has been doing and has already completed and is planning to do in the future. And I hope your interest in today's webinar indicates that you agree with us that conservation is a social endeavor and that it's impossible to do or think or talk about conservation without thinking about the role that people play in that. So firstly, I will just give a brief introduction to what this ConSoSci partnership is. Then I will talk about some of the lessons that we've learned from two research projects that we completed as a group in the past few years. And finally, I will tell you about some of the things that we are doing based on the findings of that research and how they have influenced our sort of programming and work that we want to do in the future. So the ConSoSci partnership, or the Conservation Social Science Partnership, is a group of conservation NGOs, researchers, and social science practitioners, as you can see by the collection of logos on the slide. The partnership began in 2019. The partners came together to address what they saw as critical gaps in social science capacity, implementation, and accessibility in the field of conservation. We felt that a partnership was needed to share the lessons that were being learned, to leverage the diverse expertise across all of these different organizations and groups, to avoid duplication of efforts, and also to make sure that we are sort of collectively progressing in applying conservation social sciences within our field. ConSoSci's mission is simple. It is to promote, facilitate, and coordinate the use of effective and ethical social science, data collection practices, and analysis to inform conservation decision-making and action. And by doing so, we hope to, and we envision a future where a world where nature and people are thriving together, which is enabled by a deep understanding of the relation between people, their well-being, and their environments. Broadly speaking, the work of ConSoSci encompasses three major components. The first is to promote greater literacy in social science methods and ethics among conservation practitioners, especially those who are already using or want to use social science methods to advantage in their field. We develop tools to improve the collection, management, and analysis of conservation social science data. And we are helping practitioners to build their capacity to learn how to apply approaches and tools from the social sciences. And to these ends, we are building a community, and we have established a website, for example, which is a platform for us to build that community and share these resources. We've conducted a study or a short survey on capacity building needs. The survey was prioritized because we felt there was a gap in understanding what the conservation community needed insofar as social science support. The goal of the survey was to ultimately determine what the ConSoSci partnership could do to help fill those needs. We circulated the survey amongst conservation professionals and academics between September and December 2020. And in total, we received 90 responses. And if any of you among us today responded to the survey, we thank you once again for the time you gave. I'll now describe some of the results from this survey. These three graphs show the profiles of the respondents that responded to the survey by their type of organization, their role within that organization, and also their geographical location. What's interesting is that there's a sort of wide range of roles being represented, research is the most frequent role, but that most of the respondents were based at non-profit organizations in North America, and particularly in the US. We asked respondents about their understanding and application of the principles of ethics in social science research. Most of the organizations where respondents worked did follow ethical guidelines for the social sciences, but it is quite notable that there is a lot of no responses, indicating that there are still many organizations where social science ethics principles are not being applied in any particular way, or perhaps unclearly, which is indicated by the I don't know responses. So depending on the type of institution, no and I don't know responses range between 10 and 25%. A further quarter of respondents did not respond to these questions. So for us, this signals that there's an opportunity here to ensure and increase the use of ethical guidelines in conservation social science research. In terms of the types of social science research that respondents are applying and using, as you can see in this pie chart, there's a broad range of methodologies being used. Semi-structured interviews, very common, questionnaires. There are also a lot of respondents using qualitative data analyses, all the way down to more participatory methods and workshops. Of all the respondents, so just to remind you that this consists mainly of conservation professionals and academics, 81% reported that they were already applying social science methods in their work. We asked the respondents about who in their organization or in their teams are actually designing or collecting the data that they are in the research that they are conducting. And we can see that those tend to be different. So field staff are the largest sort of group of staff that are actually collecting data, although many different types of staff are involved in data collection, whereas those who are designing the data collection or designing the studies tend to be project managers, program directors, or technical advisors, for example. And it's interesting to note, as we mentioned before, that while the vast majority of respondents come from North America and also Europe, the data that they are collecting tends to be coming from places like Africa, Latin America, and Asia. We asked respondents about their experience receiving training within the social sciences. Most respondents reported that they had maybe received that kind of training before their current employment, so perhaps during their education. Very few were receiving that training as a part of their work at their current institution. In terms of what that training covered, the most frequently cited topics included analysis, different kinds of social research methods, workshops, interviews, and also ethics. Respondents identified many challenges to their use of social science in conservation, especially lack of skills and knowledge was probably the most frequently cited reason for or barrier to applying social science methods. Other reasons given were that social sciences are not prioritized by leadership of their organizations, that there's limited knowledge of ethical approaches for working with the communities of interest, as well as lack of training opportunities, lack of time, etc. So what are the conservation social science needs? Respondents suggested that those who would benefit most from training in the conservation social sciences would be the field staff, followed by the project managers. Most respondents said that it would be very useful to receive training in the social sciences. And in terms of the kinds of training that they would prefer, online, there's a strong preference for online training. I wonder if this might also reflect that this survey took place during COVID. Second, there was in-person instructor-led training. So instructor-led training was perceived as the most useful, but there's also some appetite for online self-guided modules and instructional videos. In terms of barriers to accessing this kind of training, as we can see on the left, mainly it's to do with resources and time for staff to actually participate in this kind of training. So to summarize this first phase of research, although most respondents already use a variety of social science methods, they still feel like capacity building would be very useful within their organizations. There's an opportunity to strengthen the use of ethical guidelines and ethical principles in conservation social science research. By providing online free and open source training materials, our ConSoSci partnership could begin to address some of those challenges in applying social science research in conservation, particularly lack of resources and knowledge that academics and researchers at NGOs perceive. Through other engagement strategies and partnerships with organizational leaders and funders, we can also try to influence prioritization of organizational leadership, allowing staff to allocate more of their time and resources potentially to this kinds of work or this kind of capacity building. So there's a need for capacity building resources in the short term, and also in the long term, there is a need to change organizational cultures. Following on from that survey and this needs assessment, we conducted a second piece of research, which we're calling capacity building gap analysis. This was a response to the results of the first survey, and we conducted this in 2021 to understand what resources there are already available, to compile those resources, to make them available to conservation practitioners and researchers, to understand where the gaps are, and then understand how we can recommend or start to fill some of those gaps. We conducted a search, quite a thorough search online, trying to cover a broad range of conservation social science topics. And in total, we collected 446 different training resources. We focused on low cost or free resources, and particularly those that related directly or explicitly to social science research in the context of conservation. And this library of resources we have made available at our website, which you can see linked here on the slide. The majority of search effort was conducted in English, but we did also work with experts in various languages like French, Bahasa Indonesia, Portuguese, and Spanish to do some preliminary assessments of resources in those languages. This matrix you see on the right is a kind of visual representation of the resources that we included in our and compiled in our database. And you can see we've assessed resources on different sort of topics, categories, by the sort of number of resources available, by the range of media in which those resources are available, whether or not they relate explicitly to conservation, whether or not they're open access. And we also did a sort of preliminary check of the quality of those resources. So as you can see, there are resources available on a broad range of social science topics. Most of them are open access and freely available. Very few of them relate directly to conservation. So these tend to be resources from the social sciences more broadly. We also found that there was a lack of resources on the more practical aspects of data collection and running and implementing social research studies, such as impact monitoring and evaluation. So some of the key takeaways of this gap analysis are shown here. And this ultimately shaped the strategic planning of the ConSoSci partnership on what kind of support we should prioritize. In short, as I mentioned, there are many tools available, but they can be difficult to find or access if you don't already have some prior understanding of these topics. So to help with this, we are developing a library of resources and a guide which will guide conservation researchers and practitioners through this library to help them discover, learn, and choose from different tools and different resources. We also believe that conservation research has unique ethical challenges. Although it overlaps with other fields like anthropology and development, there are things about conservation as a discipline that make it that cause it to have unique challenges ethically. And there's a lack of resources geared towards ethics within the conservation context. So we are working to develop guidance and several other resources for NGOs to build their own ethical review boards and to start implementing and applying ethical research principles. As I mentioned, resource coverage in languages other than English is quite poor. Although our search focused on English language, we did find that there was actually very few resources available in other languages. So we are going to start translating some of the more high quality resources we found. And when we develop our own resources, we will ensure that they are also available in multiple languages. Furthermore, many of the methods and resources are advanced, and they are difficult to learn simply from textual resources or from watching a video. So there is a need to go beyond a library of online resources to developing more interactive forms of training, instructor-led training, but also just to ensure that we can facilitate more collaboration between conservationists and trained social scientists. Another thing that could help here is to develop broad conservation-specific guides or textbooks for program managers to give them that broader understanding of what the social sciences are and what they can do. Finally, we found, as I mentioned, that there are very few resources covering the more practical aspects of implementing and conducting social science research programs. So we are starting to develop conservation social science primers for beginners to give that basis. So just to go over some of those main supports that we are hoping to be able to offer and which we are already offering. Firstly, we have this training library, which is our library of over 400 curated free and or low cost learning materials, which is available online through our website. Secondly, there is a library of forms, which are field tested survey forms that you can adapt for your own needs and for your own surveys. Many of these are already loaded onto Kobo Toolbox, which is a survey and data collection software, and they cover a variety of topics relevant to conservation practitioners. And third, there is here a link to our YouTube channel where different kinds of trainings, online webinars such as this one, and other presentations will be housed and available to view. So please do check out the ConSoSci website where you can find all of these resources and any further resources as they become available. So looking ahead, what kind of resources are going to become available in the near future? What are we working on currently? This includes, as I mentioned, a guide or sort of interactive decision tree to guide conservationists through this vast database of social science resources to help them find what they're looking for, to help them become aware of what is available. Training and other resources specifically related to ethics in the context of conservation. Translation of key resources into other languages. And we're going to continue building out the resources in the forum library as well as the training resource database. And anybody can suggest resources to include in that database through an online form. And finally, we're hoping to facilitate more events and more discussions to raise awareness, to network about the importance of the social sciences in conservation. So I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to attend and to learn about the Conservation Social Science Partnership. So hopefully you now have a better understanding of how we are working collaboratively to promote greater literacy of social sciences in the conservation discipline, to develop tools and resources for researchers to more effectively manage social science data collection and analysis, and to build the capacity of practitioners to apply social science tools, social science methods and principles to improve their programming. And the links here are to the website, which contains all of those resources I've mentioned, as well as an email address, which we would love you to get in touch if you want to collaborate, or if you have any suggestions. And finally, the YouTube link, which will host this talk, as well as many other talks that have been given by my colleagues at the partnership. So thank you once again, and I would like to open the floor to questions.